to the CyberVault. Today I'm thrilled to be joined by Tom Eston. Tom is the Senior Director of Professional Services at Snyk and also the founder of the Shared Security podcast. So lovely to be joined by a fellow podcaster. But Tom, why don't you maybe kickstart, give us a little bit more of an intro to yourself today.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you, Katie, for having me on your show. Much appreciated. I love talking to other podcasters. You know, we have so much in common, right? Like we're both doing shows and get to interview guests. So I'm glad we were able to make this work. But yeah, a little bit about myself. So my name's Tom Eston. I have been in the industry for, wow, it's almost 20 years at this point. So, it's been quite the journey, as you can imagine. Things have changed a lot in the industry over a course of 20 years. But I've also been a podcaster. So like you said, I host the Shared Security podcast, and we're coming up on our 16th year podcasting. And so it's actually pretty cool. We're one of the longest running security podcasts in existence, which is like hard to
Crazy.
believe. Like we were in that first group of podcasts, and there's only a few of us left that are still doing this today. So it is definitely a labor of love. And I just love doing it, love interviewing people, love talking about what's going on in the industry and in the world every week. So yeah, if you haven't checked out the Shared Security podcast, definitely check us out. We're at sharedsecurity.net and wherever you like to get your podcasts at.
Absolutely. And I think kind of the really cool thing that you do, Tom, is obviously you bring kind of the different perspective that I do, in the sense that obviously I get really holistic view of what's going on from the sense of meeting with the founders and the leaders and stuff like that and talking about what they're seeing. But you actually work the day job as well, right? Like you're kind of there, you're on the ground, you're getting to experience, actually work with the technologies. And I think that's a really nice place to start the episode, because you've had a really great career. Like, and when you look at that, it's quite nice that you've also been able to, I suppose, build your podcast with your career as it's evolved, and you've worked for some pretty big names in security. I mean, why don't you maybe just tell us a little bit more about what's that journey looks like?
Yeah, I kind of have the ideal journey, I guess you'd say, is I came into the industry before cybersecurity was even a thing, right? So, and actually before information security actually started, companies were just starting to think about and build out these information security teams. And mainly here in the US, it was because of regulation, right? So we had the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which required all publicly traded companies to have a information security team. And I was very fortunate that, when I started out my career, I started out doing help desk. I started doing, break fix type of work with laptops and desktops. And I was always the type that was, fixing things, very good electronics, still do that today. But I found kind of this niche of like, I'm fixing computers, I'm getting into IT and learning all I can about the technology at the time. And I had an opportunity to join a brand new information security team that they hired an auditor that was part of the company I was working at. And I got to build out a information security team from the ground up. And I was just very junior myself. I had really no experience outside of, I was the guy that was patching all of the servers and maintaining the network at this company that I worked at. And so someone gave me a chance and said, "Hey, do you want to help build this new function?" And so I got experience in, building an information security policy, working with auditors. We hired a company to do our first penetration test. The company never had a penetration test done before, and that was actually my first experience getting into what now is cybersecurity and offensive security. I was watching this pen tester just completely annihilate our network, within like a matter of like 5 to 10 minutes. He had domain admin, he had access to all this sensitive information. And I'm just sitting next to him like, this is amazing. Like, this is the best thing I've ever seen in my life. Like, how do I do what this guy is doing right now? Because this is I mean, this just kind of energized me, thinking like, yes, this is what I want to do in my career. And so I had that opportunity just to learn everything I could from this gentleman that was, doing a pen test on the network. And then I started just exploring on my own, like, well, how do I learn about this? How do I get more involved? And so I started to go to conferences like DEF CON in Las Vegas. I started to just put myself into the community. I started a blog back then. And, this is when Twitter didn't even exist yet. It was only Facebook and I believe MySpace. If you all remember MySpace, that was one of the original social networks. And so I just started networking with people, and I started to just learn as much as I could. And blogging was just a great way to do that at the time, where I was just learning things, and I would write a blog, I would share knowledge with others, and I started to just get to know people in the industry. And before you know it, I was kind of working my way through my career. I was working for a bank at the time. They allowed me to be part of their internal penetration testing team. And I was also, doing my own research. And at the time, Twitter had just come out, and Facebook didn't even have a security team yet. So I found a niche where I was focused on finding vulnerabilities within social networks. And so I would blog, I would talk about that. And then I had an opportunity to speak at DEF CON for the first time, with actually my co-host of my podcast, Kevin Johnson, because we were doing a lot of research into vulnerabilities within social networks. And so that was kind of we had an opportunity to speak about our research. And then from that point forward, we had, started doing more research on social networks and web applications. And I had opportunities to speak at Black Hat and all the big conferences. And that just really took my career to the next level. And all along the way, I was still podcasting. I was still networking with people, getting to know people in the industry, having them on my podcast. I was on their podcast. We were like, kind of sharing all that information. And I'd have to say that like that's been the big driver of like my career, is networking and getting to know people in the industry. Because, and this is one of the pieces of advice I give people in their career, is the more people you know, the better. And it's usually not what you know, but it's who you know in your career. And I can't tell you how many opportunities I have had just because I've met somebody, or I've had a conversation, even at a conference in passing. Somebody remembers, oh, yeah, I know a guy who knows a guy. Or, where I've had people that have come to me and say, hey, I'm kind of stuck in my career. I'm not really sure what to do. And because I know somebody that I could introduce them to, that in a lot of cases has helped get them a job, or taken their career in a new different direction that they didn't really expect. But the networking piece has just been so critical. And that's the advice I give people, especially nowadays, because it is so hard, as you know, in the recruiting field right now, is how do I differentiate myself amongst everybody else? This large crowd of people that are all sending resumes. I always tell people, resume is not enough anymore. Like, you have to do something else. You have to make yourself, different than the other candidates. And one way you do that is really through networking and your network.
Yeah, you actually you unpacked two key things there, and I think kind of that one that you were closing off on is the networking piece is critical, and cyber is so community driven. I think that people don't necessarily recognize the power that just knowing people and making space for yourself in a room or at the table actually holds. And often people want to help others, and it's it's a case like you say, oh, I might not be hiring, but my friend might be. Let me see if I can
Yeah.
help. But the other thing you discussed there is how you actually got into security. You can easily look at your career and say, wow, you've had an impressive career at security, in cybersecurity, and you've done X, Y, and Z. But actually, I think the key factor there is to recognize that cybersecurity wasn't the first job. It was the help desk. It was the IT desk. And people don't always recognize that just because you have the degree, or just because you've got a bit of exposure to X, Y, and Z, or maybe a certification you paid for, even then, actually, sometimes the best route in is kind of pivoting into it and getting exposure to the individuals that actually your technology is going to end up helping. I suppose the end user.
Yeah, yeah, and in fact, I'll tell you another thing that I found that I learned over the years is I look for candidates as a hiring manager, I always look for candidates that have a very diverse background. And it's not always in cybersecurity or in this industry or technology. I will tell you, some of the best penetration testers that I have ever worked with and have hired have come from backgrounds outside of cybersecurity. So, for example, I worked with a gentleman who was a nurse in an ER nurse most of his career. And then he pivoted into cybersecurity, and we gave him a job as a penetration tester. And what he brought to the table was he was amazing with customers because he's got that bedside manner. He knows how to talk to people. He has compassion. He has empathy. And I found, and while he was also very technical, those types of skills, those people skills, were much more valuable. There was another woman that I worked very closely with in my career. She was a fine arts dealer in San Francisco and became a penetration tester and a very technical person and eventually a leader in an organization I worked at. And again, like very different background, but she brought things that, outside of the technical that are also so important in our industry is how to communicate, how to talk to executives, how to, handle different situations and problems that are encountered. So I found that technical skills are extremely valuable, but those people skills, the things that we don't often talk about, how to communicate and listen, and all of those things are even more valuable because those are the things that really drive a business, and the things that if you can help solve problems, oftentimes they're not all technical problems, they're people problems at the end of the day.
And I think you're 100% right in what you're saying, and I think kind of it's often a skill set that people are really looking for now. Can you deal with customers and can you deal with people? But I suppose another way to look at that is when you look at career development, right? Because you also, if you kind of leadership is the pathway that you want to step into, and I think kind of you're a great example of this because you've been the individual contributor, you've also been the leader, and very much so seen both sides of that coin, but to step into leadership, you also have to have those people skills. It's a very different challenge. I mean, maybe talk to us about that transition that you made and kind of what that journey was like. Because obviously, as well, like you mentioned at the beginning, you were kind of, I suppose, not necessarily forced into it, but really nudged into that direction when it came to, hey, you've got this new responsibility, you're building out this security division. So, yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your journey during that transition?
Yeah, it's always an interesting topic because I think I'm like a lot of people that we were all high achievers, and we worked really hard, being a technical person, learning everything we can, and you become this go-to person for everything. And then one day somebody comes up to you and says, you know what, you'd make a great manager. And you're like, wait a minute, what? I don't know about that. Like, I've never managed people. I just want to stick to what I'm good at, which is the technical aspects, the pen testing, all of these things. And so I had somebody that came up to me at a job I had and was just like, hey, do you want to, lead the team? And I said, it was a small team of pen testers at the time. And I said, yeah, I mean, as long as I can still do penetration testing and not give up that technical side that I really enjoy, sure, I'll do it. And so I kind of did this half and half thing. And for a while, it was good. I was like, okay, I can do both jobs. But then I realized that you can't do both because it became extremely stressful where I was still doing client engagements. I was a consultant at the time, and I was also trying to manage this team. And to do both things really well, something's got to give. Either the technical work you're doing is going to give, or the people is going to give. And I actually found that I had to choose the people side. because that just was much more important. I could find other consultants that could do the same job that I was doing. In fact, I found consultants that would actually doing better technical work than I was doing because they were completely focused on it. And so I had to make the decision. And I think everybody at some point that comes from a technical background that wants to get into leadership or management, you have to make that choice. It's very, very hard to do both things and do both things very well. And so I decided, you know what? I'm going to do the manager leadership path. And I had to make the hard decision of just giving up being a penetration tester and doing that part of the job. But what I found after some time, because it was scary, it's really scary for people to like make that jump. I actually found the people part of leading teams and leading people to be much more challenging than the technical aspects of having a technical job. I found that just the human component of everything is a huge challenge, but I'm a person that loves a new challenge. I love learning new things. And so I just, went all in on that. And I'm really happy that I did, because I will say that I find leadership and managing teams has been the most rewarding thing that I have done in my career. And mostly because I love seeing people on my teams just do amazing things, not only in their day job, but with their careers. And if I can say that I have helped mentor that person, or I've given that person some guidance for their career, which essentially becomes maybe their livelihood or something that they've always wanted to do, I find that much more rewarding than just, hacking into a system and then getting shell and like saying, "Yep, I broke this system." And that was at one point in my life very rewarding to me. But now I find the people side of it much more rewarding, because I'm actually, as a leader, you're actually making a difference in somebody's life. You're helping them, you're helping grow their career. And that's where I would just encourage anybody that is thinking about, well, I'm just going to stay technical my whole career because I'm just good at it. You might want to just give it a chance. Like, try it out. I've had plenty of people that have, tried out being a manager and it just wasn't for them. And that's totally fine. But I think it's worth to just explore that if that is an interest. And hopefully you have, a leader or somebody that you can work with that maybe mentor you and give you some tips and advice. I was very fortunate to have many great mentors in my career. I still encourage people, like, always try to get a mentor. I actually encourage people to get mentors outside of cybersecurity, because it gives you a very different perspective on your own career and your own industry. Because sometimes we get trapped into this, this think tank of the same type of thoughts, same type of mentality. And I find people outside of the industry can offer something a little bit different that maybe you didn't think about. But mentorship is a big thing. I still mentor several people. I have my own. I'm a mentee. I'm a mentor. It's just something that's so important and has been just a great thing in my career.
And I think that's one of the things that people often really overlook, is the power of, we can talk about community, we can talk about networking, we can talk about kind of just the grind, I suppose, and working really hard. But realistically, if you've got somebody backing your corner, and I think you have to have that self-development mindset, the mindset of, I want to improve and I want somebody to tell me how to improve, but tell me, what am I doing great? And also, what am I not doing so great? And I think that is a self-reflection that can be really challenging. And especially if you want to step into leadership, I think it's even more critical. If you want to become a mentor, you have to be really, willing to recognize that you're never going to be perfect. You're always going to have flaws, but
Right.
you want to try and develop them, and take on that constructive criticism, which I imagine is probably something that helped with that transition as well.
Oh, absolutely. You have to do a lot of self-reflection, and you have to be vulnerable. A good mentor will actually push you to show your vulnerability and to talk more about your weaknesses and where you're not just you're good, not where you're not good at things, and how do you get better at things. I think just like everything in life, we are constantly learning, we're constantly evolving and adapting, and I've really appreciated the mentors that have pushed me and have challenged me and to think different about things and how I do my job and how I work with people. And that's been a huge benefit. And that's something that I try to also, do with my staff, as well as, the people that work for me and the people that I mentor, because it is a way of paying it forward. And I'm extremely grateful that I have just been so fortunate to have people in my life and leaders in my life that have done the same thing with me. And so, if anything that we can do to kind of pass that back to the next generation and to the younger generation coming up in the industry, the better for everybody.
And I think actually what could be really interesting to unpack here as well, because you talked about the power of potentially having a mentor that's not necessarily cybersecurity
Mhm.
specific, but also maybe also having somebody that does recognize the industry. How can people go about finding a mentor, because I think that especially if you're earlier on in your career, you're earlier into your development phase, maybe you've only just stepped into leadership, or you are pretty new to the career. What, like, I imagine it can be a hard place to start, of being like, what do I do? Do I just send some connection requests? Do I just go to a conference? What would your advice be for anybody that's like, yeah, go on, I want to get a mentor, but maybe I just don't know
Yeah.
how.
Yeah, it's really challenging. I definitely agree with that. I think you just have to start with kind of your current state of like, who do you know already, right? So if let's just say you're in school, you're in college, talk to your professor, talk to, others that are in the school or leadership that, hey, I'm interested in finding a mentor. You actually be surprised a lot of schools have these type of mentorship programs and other things that you can get involved with. But I also start with your local community as well. One of the things that I was a part of a group called Toastmasters. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they're like a public speaking type of community that helps you with your public speaking skills. And actually, that was a great group that I had found, people that I could, connect with and also find mentors that are all outside of cybersecurity or in various industries. So, there's lots of these other types of groups in your local community that you can look at. But again, it's about networking, right? It's about getting out there and just talking to people. And I know that's sometimes really, really hard, especially in our industry. I think we just happen to be a lot of introverts, right? We like to just do our own thing and, don't talk to me while I while I do my job, right? But I always encourage people, like, even if you have that personality type, you could still communicate. And even if it's through an email or through a LinkedIn request, like, I always tell people, like, if there's somebody that you admire in the industry, like, send them a message, like, go up to them at a conference. Like, if you see them walking in the hall, like, oh, that's, like, for me, it was like HD Moore, one of these, super famous, security people. And I was always like, I can't talk to them. They're like some famous superstar. But you'd be surprised, like, just talking to them, and they're so open and they're not like gonna reject you, like, like they're human just like the rest of us. And I just bring that up because, like, sometimes there's people outside the industry that maybe you've admired or you've heard about, and you'd be surprised, just send them a message, you may actually get a response, and that could be your next relationship, a mentor relationship that you're building, just because you took that chance. Right. And I
Yeah.
always tell people, just take a chance. Like, what's the worst that can happen? They'd say no, they ignore you. Oh, well, you move on. But it's just one of those things of getting in your mind of like, they're human as well. And I just want to reach out and have a conversation.
Yeah, I suppose it kind of falls to that typical imposter syndrome as well. And I love the way that you kind of broke it down there. But I think it's so easy to look at people that make a lot of noise in the space of being really successful and be intimidated by kind of their success. But at the end of the day, actually, those individuals have probably had somebody mentor them to help them get to where they are. And realistically, it's probably nice to get the recognition of someone to be like, wow, like I'm in awe. I would love to know, do you have any advice? Could you help? And sometimes they might not be able to. As you say, the fear
Yeah.
of rejection is also kind of I suppose it's that thief of joy, in the sense that you're putting this limitation on yourself and your potential for progression and success. But I suppose having kind of that opportunity to look, if you can open a door, even if you're knocking on 101 opens, that's a door that's
Hmm.
opened, kind of thing, and that can definitely be daunting. So, and I appreciate the kind of the podcast has probably taken a bit of a turn around this, but I think this is all really valuable stuff for a lot of people out there. What would your advice be to somebody who's maybe been in the industry a little bit longer? You know, they have experience, maybe their time, they're in that position of, do I, don't I, for leadership, or do I,
Hmm.
don't I kind of take that next step out of my comfort zone for, I've been a pen tester, I've had a great opportunity working on X, Y, and Z, and I'm very much in my comfort zone here. How can somebody maybe identify that it's time to take that leap and give it a try? And what would your advice be about around kind of going for that?
It's a great question. I often tell people to do some self reflection on the current job and the current role that you have. And I think there's a couple different ways you can do self reflection. I'm a big fan of journaling, just writing out my thoughts and, asking myself questions about like my job and my career, and or it might be just going for a walk, right? Like spend some time out in nature, like disconnect yourself from technology, leave the phone at home, turn the phone off. And because I find that like the way to understand, like, am I truly happy doing what I'm doing today, and does it make sense for me to move into something new like leadership, or it could be anything, right? Is to actually self-reflect and actually, am I happy in the work that I'm doing now? And if you come back and say, you know what, like, I'm really happy. I love the job that I do. I get a lot of joy. I get a lot of passion out of the work. You should probably stay doing what you're doing. If it does bring you joy and that's something that's good for you, why would you want to change that? But if you do have that inkling of curiosity of, you know what, I wonder what it would be like if I was a manager, or would going into a leadership position help my career, and would I learn something new? And if you have those indicators, that to you should be like, I should explore this. I should find somebody that can help me. I often will say, like, talk to somebody that's in the position that you want to be, or that you want to grow into, and that's where you can get your mentor, right? That person might be able to help you. It could be a person in your company. It could be another leader. Don't be afraid to ask of like, hey, I'm thinking about one day maybe going into, a director position that you have. Would you spend 30 minutes with me just talking to me about maybe your career journey, how you ended up where you're at? And just have that conversation. And I think you just need to talk to people that are in the roles that you want to move into, and not just one person, because a one person might just have their own maybe biases, or maybe just their own very strange unique journey of how they got to where they are, because some people just fall into positions and it all just works out, right? Like they have a lot of luck. So I recommend just talking to at least two or three people, because you're going to get different stories, you're going to get different journeys, and that's all information for you to take in, and then also again self reflect on what they are saying, and try to match that up to where you're at in your career. I don't just recommend like, yep, I'm just going to take a chance, change my entire career out of the blue. You might get lucky and it all works out, but I find that the more that you can talk to other people, get advice, take all that information in, and make a real informed decision, and by the time you do that, what you might find is you've already got the path laid out for you. You're almost kind of working backwards of, okay, so this person is at this point in his career. How do I, what steps do I need to take now to get to that point where they're at?
Yeah. No, Tom, I think we've unpacked so much there, to be honest with you. I think kind of it's one thing to explore your journey, but I think it's so easy to look at kind of you. I think you really just highlighted it so well that everybody's journey is different, and it doesn't matter who you are, your journey is still going to look different to somebody else's. So get as much insight as you can, and understand how people do it different ways, because some might align to you personally better than others, and
Yep.
just because one person's kind of train of thought or the way that they work doesn't kind of, I suppose, have synergy with yours. There's nothing wrong with that. There probably are people that have had success in the same route. But I suppose then, just to close off, Tom, I'd really like to say, because we've had loads of key bits of advice there that we've talked about, but if kind of for any of the listeners that are going to walk away from this episode, if there was kind of one closing kind of statement, one closing piece of advice that you would say, look, you're going to walk away from anything that you were going to take from this episode, this is kind of the liner that is like, take it, get it stuck in the head and make sure it stays there.
Yeah, I think there's two things I would leave people with is one, listen more, talk less. So that has been something I've had to learn over the years in my career is in any situation, before you like want to jump into saying something or you're trying to solve a problem or you're very passionate about something, before you say anything, just take a step back, listen, and then respond. And so I've always found that improving my listening skills has been hugely beneficial in everything that I do in my career and my life and everything. So that's one advice. And the other I'd say is empathy. And lead with empathy is very important, but also for your coworkers and in everything you do. I found that, and this was hard for me at the beginning, right? Because you just make a lot of assumptions about people and you don't really know what's going on in other people's lives. And especially in cybersecurity, where we're, in very, I'll say, passionate positions of sometimes, we know what's right. Sometimes we also are in positions of we just want to say no because it's, well, that's not secure. We can't do that. But ask the questions. Ask questions of like, okay, why do you feel that way? Or how can I help? And try to understand people's perspectives. And all of that is done with just having an empathetic mindset, and just understand, put yourself in other people's shoes. That's the other thing I found that has been just hugely valuable in my career. And I think for everybody else as well.
Fantastic. Well, what a way to close the episode. And thank you so much for joining me today, Tom. It's been a pleasure to have you on. Great to hear your insights. And to anybody listening, I hope you found this conversation as inspiring and as formative as I have. Make sure to subscribe. Obviously, make sure to check out Tom's podcast as well. And yeah, it's been a pleasure to have you on. So until next time.
Thank you for having me, Katie.